Okay, I just met Stacy, and I said to her, I don't get excited that often, but I was super excited to meet her because I am a big fan of yours, and I follow you, and I've listened to all your videos, all your advice. And when I found you through social media, which is where I found you, I was like, amen. Amen, and thank God. Because I felt like you were speaking, we were speaking the same language. You were doing it in a more forceful and fit way and speaking from your area of expertise. But I was just saying to you, and I think you were agreeing, there's a sea change going on in women's health in the last year or two. Talk to me about how you feel the difference, how you can sense the difference right now.
So I look back about 5 years ago. So that was, I guess, the onset of the pandemic, if we do that. And there was still a huge discrepancy in women's health.
Right.
But because of the outcomes and the differential outcomes of the pandemic, it made the entire global medical system stand up and go, what's going on here? So then when we start talking about sex differences and physiological differences between men and women, it started resonating. So now we see the research is coming out is really trying to focus more on women's health, not generalizing from a male data set. And there are really specific points of contention that are really starting to be examined. So we look at all the cancer treatments, we look at dementia and Alzheimer's, and we also see all the menopause conversation around hormone therapies, which then resonates back to like PCOS and endometriosis, all these things that have been ignored up to this point. And now there's like a groundswell movement to really try to bring that to the forefront. So if we think, oh, it's 2025, almost 2026, and we still don't have an answer to what causes endometriosis or what is a better option for PCOS than using an oral contraceptive pill or some kind of hormone therapy. So starting to dig in more into that. So it's really interesting to see this shift and especially globally having a shift. And I guess that's the only positive thing that came out of the pandemic.
But do you, but when people come up to you or respond to you on social media, can you tell a difference in the questions that they are asking the general public? Are they feeling empowered? Are they just waking up to like, wow, there's no funding, there are no answers, I didn't know this? What's the difference you can tell?
So I get a lot of questions of how can I help with research? Can I be a participant? Have you looked at this avenue for research funding? Have you looked at this avenue? Have you talked to this VC? So there's a lot of that kind of conversation that's coming up. But more and more women are going, this finally makes sense. Like now I can go talk to my doctor and tell them what I'm experiencing, but not feel like I'm being gaslit. I think people are taking more ownership of their health now. And now they're really trying to find out what specifically does this mean to me and what can I do? Instead of just the traditional ways to go to a physician tells you, well, this is what's wrong or not wrong and take this and do that. But there's this distrust in the medical system now, or the lack of access and lack of resources. So people are really trying to own it for themselves to then be able to go telehealth or normal doctor and say, these are the things, this is what I know, can you help me? If not, then I need to find someone else.
And women's health for so long was viewed as a mammogram and a pap smear and out the door, right?
Yeah.
And that women really need to know that at every decade, their health is completely different.
Absolutely.
So talk a little bit about that, because you talk about PCOS or we talk about reproductive health, and all of a sudden we're in menopause or perimenopause, and then we're postmenopausal, and it's all different.
Yeah.
And your advice to women at those different junctures is completely different.
Yeah. So I always start at puberty now that my daughter is like in the middle of it, but awareness of it, and you see it. It's like we see a definitive point where girls stop being physically active, and that is not wanting to run around on the playground and that kind of stuff, because they're starting to feel very ungangly in their body. They don't feel confident. And the way that the system is set up is to perpetuate that, not intentionally, but just because there hasn't been awareness of how there's a difference between boys and girls as they go through puberty, where girls complete biomechanics, so the way that they move changes. Their hips widen, their knee to hip angle is different, their shoulder girdle widens. So now running and throwing and jumping is completely different and not very comfortable.
And they're self-conscious.
Exactly.
All of a sudden that becomes their dominant emotional.
Right. and the way that they think and perceive instructions. So I use the example of the football pitch or the soccer pitch, where if you have a boys team and they're told to do corner kicks one-on-one, the boys are really into it. Let's do it, let's do it, let's do it. But you tell the girls to do corner kicks one-on-one, they're like, yeah, no. Because they don't feel like, they don't want to be singled out. But if you say, okay, we're going to do pair corner kicks, they're all in. So it's just the way that we understand how the girls are developing physically, but also emotionally and mentally, where they feel that everyone's watching them and it's really uncomfortable. They don't know what to do in their new body. All of a sudden, they might be growing boobs and body composition is changing. But if we switch and say, you know what, we can coach them from a mental and a physical aspect that encourages new strength and functional movement through these new biomechanics, and we create a learning environment that isn't toxic, that's a safe space, then they flourish. So we've seen a lot of pilot programs that are coming through when the parents or the coach or the teacher even is educated, that they can then talk to them and they can also say, and your period is going to start. It's going to be irregular for a bit of time, but this is what happens. So then when we get into our steady reproductive years, this is where we have our sex hormones that kind of work for us for recovery, for muscle development, bone development. So we have a little bit of play. It's in those reproductive years we see more and more what we call anovulatory cycles. So we aren't actually ovulating, so we might not know. And this leads into fertility issues that Natalie Crawford out of Austin talks a lot about. It's an inflammatory response, it's environmental toxins, it is a lack of sleep, it's the stress. So we have to be aware of all of the societal pressures that can alter menstrual cycle and menstrual cycle function in our reproductive years. And how do we retrain according to the stress and the load that's going on with regards to the rest of life, so that we can really support menstrual function and endocrine function for the health of the woman as she's aging, because this is where we're getting peak bone density, where we're getting lots of neuroplasticity, we're developing stress resilience, immunity, all of these things that can change across the menstrual cycle. We want to be able to encompass and enhance with the type of physical training and mental training that we're doing.
And then you focus on women, let's just say in their 40s, their 50s, their 60s and beyond. So while you're saying you're working with young girls about telling them their periods are coming on, their body may be changing, then you move into women whose periods are leaving and their bodies may be changing and their brains are also changing. Their mood is changing. Their bones are changing. Everything is out of whack. What is the best advice today for a woman in her 40s, 50s, and 60s so that she can age well, age independently, and age with strength?
Yeah, so we look at the four main factors that go into a health span. So we look at sleep and nailing sleep. We have to be able to do that, or we can't instigate any kind of change. Physical activity and nutrition, so those kind of go hand in hand, interchangeable depending on motivation, and then the mindfulness and community engagement. So if someone was coming to me and say, give me the top two things that I need to do so that it can age well, like nail sleep and strength training. Because when we look at the upsurgence of research on strength training, knowing that I come from a long cardio background, the Kate Moss and the calories in, calories out, and learning about strength training along the way, we see not only is strength training great for power, which we lose significantly and now is a really strong indicator of mortality. We lose overall strength as we get older as well, especially when we're in perimenopause because of the way our sex hormones affect our muscle and our bone and our neural connections. So if we're doing strength training, we're covering the power, we're covering the strength, we're also increasing neuroplasticity. So that helps reduce Alzheimer and dementia risks, and we're also building bone. So if there's one physical activity intervention, then I would say strength training. We start with maybe body weight and move our way up into heavier loads.
But you're not, which I think is super cool. You're talking about strength training, but you're talking about also a particular kind of strength training. You're doubling down.
Yeah. I'm doubling down on it.
Talk about that and distinguishing, doubling down and distinguishing. You're not talking light weights. No. You're not talking even about 10-pound bicep curls.
No, I'm not.
Okay, what are you talking about?
Yeah, I'm talking about lifting heavy.
So what's heavy?
Yeah, so this is relative, right?
Yeah.
So if someone has never ever done any strength training, I'm not going to throw them in the gym and say, we're going to do 200-pound deadlifts, because that is injury and they're not going to be able to do it. The gyms are pretty much still very gendered and a little bit scary. So we look at the journey. So if someone's never done anything, I'm going to phase them in. I'm going to start with body weight. I'm going to add some 10-pound dumbbells. And then as they get stronger and get through the range of motion and can move well, then we start getting really specific into our heavy range of lifting. So if we look at the schematic of strength and conditioning, we see that 0 to 5 rep range is our power and strength-based range. And we know that power is really important, so that's how fast you can move under load. And for women, we only have a certain amount of fibers that move quickly, and we start to lose those really rapidly as we age. So we want to work that end of things. And for strength, we want that central nervous system response, because we want that neuroplasticity. We want to keep instigating Wordle type movements in the brain with physical activity. So if we're looking at no more than 8 reps at 80% or more of 1 rep max. So what does that mean?
What does that mean?
Right, exactly. So I like to say, if you go into a gym or you're going to lift some weights, I want you to pick a weight that feels heavy, and I want you to lift it at least 8 times. If you can lift it 8 times, and towards the end of that, you think you might be able to eke out 2 more repetitions with that weight with really good form, that's your 80%. We call that 8 reps with 2 in reserve. So that's the type of loading we want. Ideally, we want to get you back down to 3 to 5, but it takes about a year to learn how to lift that heavy properly. And it's a bit scary for people when we start talking about those kinds of loads. So it is relative. It's like, I might go in jet lagged to the gym, and when I'm at home, I can deadlift 200 pounds, but if I'm jet lagged, I might only be able to lift 160 with 2 reps in reserve. So it's very changeable. It's how heavy it is on the day, with the eye of, by the time you finish being in your strength training session, you feel worked, but you don't feel exhausted like you've done a spin class. Because we want central nervous system activation, we want total body movement, we want the strength and development of the muscles, but we don't want that tear down, complete ripped feeling that so many women are used to having, that big sweaty session that they think, oh, well, I did a really hard workout because I'm completely smashed. That's not very appropriate. We're looking for the low end, heavy loads with lots of rest between our repetitions, so that we are able to really tax central nervous system. Because the idea of it is, we want to be able to carry our own suitcases when we're 90, right? We want to be able to move well. We want to be able to pick our groceries up and put them overhead when we are living by ourselves, when we're very aged. So we start now, however early you can, and start building that tolerance and building that load to maintain brain health as well as our bone and our muscle health.
I think it's helpful to, when you talk like that, so that women understand, and people in general understand, this is allowing me to lift a grandchild or a child, right? Or my suitcase every day, because people think, well, I don't want to go in the gym, I don't want to get bulky, but you're actually doing that already. Right? You're actually in the gym if you're lifting above the overhead compartment, or if you're trying to lift a kid, or if you're carrying a kid on a front pack and another kid on your hip, right? That women are already lifting, but they don't perceive it that way. But you're also talking about, actually aggressive lifting, power lifting, not just, and that's different.
Yeah. Because we want some speed in the motion, and if you're not comfortable with speed with a barbell or weights, then we can look at like med ball slams or
med ball slams.
Med ball, so it's a medicine ball, so the heavy balls slam down, or maybe we're doing a toss against the wall. So you're getting some power movement, but it's not a really heavy load, because we want to be able to move fast with intent, because that is what stimulates fast switch fibers, which are glycolytic, which means that we'll produce lactate, which is a fuel for the brain, which women tend to lose, which is one of the reasons we're seeing a greater incidence of Alzheimer's and dementia in women as opposed to men, because men have more of those fibers and produce more lactate and are able to keep that capacity as they get older. So if we're moving with intent and moving under load and speed, that's the power-based stuff. And we can also look at jump training. So, we're jumping and landing a little bit harder than what we typically think of jump training because that stimulates the bone.
So a lot of people, I find my age, or people in their 50s and 60s, that's younger than me, when they hear jump training, they're like, my hip, my knee, my back, my sciatic. That's me talking. And you hear jump training, you're like,
Yep.
how does that speak to me?
I know. So full disclaimer, I have a torn hamstring, torn meniscus. I also have 2 artificial hips from one's an accident, one's giving childbirth. So I understand all the ramifications of what happens if you feel a little bit compromised for jump training. So if we're thinking our typical plyometric type jumps, so people are imagining like tall box jumps and like really high explosive type jumps, that's not what I'm talking about.
Yeah, that's not what I'm talking about either.
Talking about like you might have a low step in your house and you have one foot and you step down and the other step down to start. But then you're jumping down on 1 foot, or maybe you're jumping down on 2 feet. So it's not a high jump, it's a very low, but you're landing hard. Because if you're landing hard, then your whole skeletal system is absorbing that load, not your muscles. So when you're landing hard like that, it isn't a huge jar through the joints because it's being absorbed through the skeleton. Whereas we think about typical jump training, we're trying to absorb the muscle in the joints. So if we're landing from a very short distance but hard, that's the jump training we want for our bone health.
So talk about that, because so many women hear all of these statistics, you know, break your hip, you're doomed, right? Fall off the curb, and you know you're never going to bounce back. And osteoporosis is beginning to have a little bit of a moment, but most women find out about that they have osteoporosis or it's genetic, and they just go on medication. You're saying actually that lifting, jump training is an alternative to medication, or in conjunction with.
We look at it as an alternative, unless you have severe osteoporosis, and then you might use some meds and then incorporate the heavier training and get off the meds. Osteoporosis, I'm finding, is occurring earlier and earlier in life. There's a couple of 30-year-olds that I know that have reached out and like, I have osteopenia, I don't understand why. And they're pretty fit and healthy, but they have been focusing too much on cardio and yoga and that kind of stuff that isn't as bone stimulating.
Got it.
So it's like, okay, well, let's instigate some jump training. Maybe we try to do single leg hops. Maybe you do 20 a day. That's all. That's all you need to do. And over the course of 6 months, they go from osteopenic to the low end of normal. And when we're seeing women, I have case studies from women who have written into us and said, I followed your Haley Happens Power program. And when I first started, I went to my doctor because I was worried. I got a DEXA and I had osteopenia and some osteoporosis. After I finished the 12-week program, I did it again. I went back and I'm in the low end of normal for bone density. And my doctor's like, how did you do that? And all it is strength training with some heavier loads and a little bit of jump training.
Is your, and I want to talk to you about your mission with this, because this feels to me, and I've read your stuff, I've listened to your TED Talk, I've listened to all your videos, it feels bigger than you. It feels like, I always talk about my own spiritual calling. Does this feel like some spiritual calling for you?
Yeah, I think so. As I think about it, it's like, what is the driver? To travel all over the world and not see my daughter, like, what is the driver for this? I really hate inequality. And I really, really dislike the whole tier system where the male body is the norm. And we always default to the norm, where actually, if we think about it, women are 51% of the global population. We are the norm. And it's not fair that we get gaslit. It's not fair that we have to be shuttled over from male data when our physiology is different. So it's that injustice and inequality that's the driver, as well as understanding that society as a whole has created a very lazy environment. Like, we sit in rooms that are temperature controlled. We have garage door openers. Now we're having driverless cars. We don't really have to do anything that's uncomfortable. But the human body hasn't been designed for that. So the more that we can talk about small things that we can do to challenge the body to then get a really fantastic health outcome, instead of relying on pharmaceuticals or some of the other medications and things that are out there. Like, why wouldn't we do this?
Did you have an awakening moment, an aha moment, you know, that's not going to be okay. I'm going to shift that up.
Yes and no. So as I look back, there are two real pivotal moments that kind of directed me, I guess, in a subconscious way, this direction. One was when I was 17 and graduated from high school. And I'm standing in our house, and my father was a colonel in the Army and came from like 180 years of military.
Okay.
And he's like, so what are you going to do? What are you going to study? And I was like, well, I want to go be in the Army, and I want to be an Army Ranger. If I can't do that, then I want to be a Navy SEAL. And he goes, well, you can't. I was like, what do you mean I can't? He goes, you can't because you're a girl. I was like, what? And that was the very first time I ever it clicked that there are certain things supposedly girls couldn't do.
Gotcha.
And so then I went to undergrad, and I was on the crew team, and I was in exercise physiology and metabolism, and all the representation was the male athlete and the male body, unless it was pathophysiological. So girls have stress fractures, they have iron deficiency, they get overtrained, they lose their menstrual cycle. There was never a real powerful encouragement. So when I was doing a metabolism lab, and I was the only female of the three of us to do this teaching lab to learn about how the body uses glucose, and we did treadmill running for 2 hours using water one time and carbohydrate drink the other, and got all the results collated. And the instructor's like, well, we have to throw yours out. And I was like, what? It's like, well, it doesn't look like what we're expecting, so you obviously didn't do something right, so we can't use those because this is a teaching lab. I was like, wait a second, I come from a long line of military people, I know how to follow rules.
Yeah.
And then, like, retrospectively, sitting on that going, well, this isn't fair. Why are you throwing my results out? I worked just as hard and I did everything right. And it was because I was in two different phases of my menstrual cycle. And so when we look at fat and carbohydrate metabolism, there is a difference between the two phases of the menstrual cycle. But that wasn't accommodated for in these labs. And so when I approached the instructor and I was like, I think it's because like I got my period before I did the first one, which means I was in a different phase for the second one. He goes, well, that's why we don't study women. I was like, what do you mean you don't study women? So we don't study women because they have a menstrual cycle and it skews results. So we just study men because they're pretty standard, and then women are just close enough. And that's where I was like, no, wait a second. I know from being on the crew team that we train just as hard as the men. Sometimes we peak and sometimes we don't. And we talk about our periods and we talk about this, and the boys don't talk about that. And there's no representation of women in any of these textbooks. You never say she or anything like that when you're giving case studies. Like, this is just not right. And so that was the second seed that got planted. And then I became that person that kept asking why. I went and did my master's in overtraining in female runners across the menstrual cycle just to see, and there were differences from what we were finding versus what was in the literature. And I was like, there's something here. So then that was a third factor that really pushed to go, we need to really keep looking into this. And then as a high-level athlete myself and racing on a competitive international stage, trying to maximize performance for myself and my teammates, it's like, we have these questions. I'm going to go in the lab and answer them because they're not out there.
So in the last, I would say, year or two, we kind of menopause is having a moment,
Yes.
right? Everybody's talking about menopause. There's some conversation that's igniting around hormones, hormone replacement therapy. So I want to talk about that, but I want to talk about post-menopausal because, you know, women, when we talk about health span or lifespan, women are living longer, but the last 10 years of their life, they're in worse shape than ever, financially, emotionally, spiritually, physically, the whole thing. And so my question is, let me begin kind of post-menopausal. Let's just say women 60, 70, 80, 90. What is that women's health journey like? What should women be doing in that time? Let's say they've been working full-time, caregiving, raising kids. They've not been going to the gym. And so now they're post-menopausal, and this whole conversation about menopause is going on over here. What's the conversation they should be having?
So this is where we look at community. Community is very important, and activity. So, you know, as I talk about strength training, it's never, ever too late to start.
Okay.
There have been some recent articles in JAMA, Journal of American Medical Association, looking at doing heavier loads on older women, but using machines, not free weights. and they have been able to improve bone density and muscle quality.
So that's women in their 60s, 70s, 80s?
I think the oldest cohort was 80.
Okay.
So, it's never too late to start.
Okay.
But one of the biggest factors is the community aspect, because we want our friends, we want to be able to laugh, we want to be out in nature. All of these things help with brain health, with immunity, with happiness, getting people out of depression, and feeling connectedness. One of the things that I'm going after now is AI. Because when we're looking at AI, it's learning in the bell curve, and it's learning just in the middle, which again is perpetuating those biases. And why I'm bringing this up is because there's a case study that was looking at AI for physicians, and they had two 70-year-olds. One was a man, one was a woman. They had the same health issues, stress fracture, living alone, not really eating that well. And having depressive episodes. So the AI, learning from the middle of the algorithm, said the man needs intervention. We need to have some home health care. We need to make sure he gets out, has some friends to call. So we need to really step it up and make sure that he remains somewhat healthy or gets better health. For the woman, no, she's fine. I'm like, that is not appropriate. So this is the thing about AI, it's still learning from the biases. So when we start talking about postmenopausal women, we need to really wrap them up and say, you know what, don't listen to all the stuff that's coming out now that's more AI driven. We have to look at what makes a human very resilient and make them human, right? So we see we are not designed to be alone. We need interaction with peers or friends that lift us up. We need physical movement. We want to have some stress on the body that's going to encourage bone and muscle development. As our good friend Gabrielle Lyons always says, we want to be muscle-centric. It's not about what we're losing, but what we're gaining. We're gaining muscle, so we're gaining health. We're also gaining neuroplasticity. And if we're doing that with friends, then that makes everything so much better. So when we're looking at postmenopausal women, one, it's never too late to start a movement activity.
Okay.
And if you do it with friends, it makes it so much better. One, accountability. Two, you have some place to show up and you know that it's a safe space and you're going to have fun. And that whole interaction feeds back to a better time with exercise. You often push yourself a little bit more when you're with friends. And we see that time you spend with your friends reduces depression, anxiety, and boosts our immunity. So all of these things are really important.
But women in this kind of area, I would say 60s and up, the primary thing I hear over and over, I'm terrified of getting dementia. I'm terrified of Alzheimer's. Many of them have taken care of a parent with Alzheimer's. They've seen that up front. They know the statistics. 2/3 of the cases are women. Your increased jumps at 65. So what is it? And then now they're also being told by their doctors to get off of hormones. And so and we don't have the research at all for this cohort. Right? Boomers. And so we don't have any research. So for the millions of women who find themselves in these decades, 60, 70, 80, late 50s, right? Wherever, depending when you went through menopause, community, right? Strength training may be different than a woman who's at midlife, right? Which is different. Sleep always, but then women will say like, oh my God, I can't sleep because what do you tell them to do if they're really worried about Alzheimer's and their brain health?
Yeah, so we're looking at some of the newer research that's coming out about brain health and Alzheimer's. And it's not just about the tau plaques. It's about a misstep in brain metabolism. So we see around perimenopause, we start to have a little bit of metabolic inflexibility. So that means we're not using glucose as effectively, which is a precursor to developing some of the tau plaques. So if we are able to do some high intensity work, and high intensity can be high intensity for anyone across the age span, to push ourselves where we're really breathing hard and producing some lactate, that is a really strong preventative medicine type aspect for dementia and Alzheimer's. Because as we produce lactate, it crosses blood-brain barrier and is a preferred fuel for the brain. So it takes care of and starts to reset brain metabolism, reducing that inflexibility. So as much as I talk about, we want to do sprint interval training and high intensity interval training and heavy strength training, yes, we want to start early. But if I'm looking at someone who's in their 70s, like my mom who's turning 80, I know that that's not that viable. So instead we can go, okay, well, I know you go for a walk every day and you go up that hill. So this next time you go up that hill, I want you to really push the pace so you're really out of breath by the time you get to the top. Because that is a situation where they're very familiar with it. They're going to push themselves. They're going to produce a little bit of lactate, and that's the first step towards getting better brain metabolism.
What you diet, food, nutrition, not the word diet, nutrition, lifestyle. I love that you also talk about kind of the bro culture that exists in social media, always giving out advice. And up until really the last 2 years, never even had any women on to talk about hormone health, mood, all of these things, but also was advising women what to eat based on what men were eating. And so I love that you tackle this as well, which totally debunks everything we've been taught about what to eat and how to eat.
Yeah.
So talk a little bit about what women at midlife, let's just say, and beyond, should be eating. And I gather it's not salad.
No, it's not. We want to fuel ourselves and not think about the old school idea of being dainty and not eating, because that is the opposite of what we should be doing.
So women hear that and they're like, I want to be thin.
Yeah, I know. But if we eat more, especially protein, we can recomp our body and we get the aesthetics that people are after, and can maintain a thin physique, but you're so much healthier. And we also look at circadian rhythm. Because we have a different circadian rhythm length than men, and our hormones and the way that our body operates is different. So yes, we all have a cortisol peak that happens about a half an hour after we wake up. But for women, our active form of our hunger hormone is also elevated. And if we don't eat something to kind of drop that, then the body feels like it's in a threat state. Like it's like, oh my gosh, I don't have any food coming. Where's the bear? I got to start fighting the bear. So cortisol stays elevated, and we have a misstep in our appetite hormones. We see so many women that say, I'm not hungry when I first wake up. And that's more of a learned response. We can train our body to say, yep, I'm hungry, I want to eat. And it doesn't have to be a lot, but we want to look at having some protein and fiber at every eating opportunity. So that's meal and or snack. Trying to get about 0.8 to 1 gram of protein per pound of body weight. And most women, especially as we're 50 and older, are like, whoa, that's a lot of protein. But it's relatively easy for eating on a regular basis throughout the day to work with our circadian rhythm, and we're eating to maintain fuel throughout the day. We can easily get 120 to 150 grams of protein, where we're looking at sprouted grain toast and eggs for breakfast, or maybe it's overnight oats with yogurt. And then lunch, we're having a palm-sized piece of protein, either fish or chicken or tempeh, with some beans and some nuts and a salad. So you're getting fiber with the protein. And then for a snack, maybe you're having cheese and almonds. So you're having some kind of protein and fiber. And then by the end of the day, there's protein in some of the fiber that you're eating with our beans and our nuts and our seeds and some even green peas. And then the definitive proteins that we know. And by the end of the day, 120, 150 gram protein have been consumed.
I love that, because I was always of the vein, that you should do intermittent fasting, that you shouldn't eat in the morning. And so listening to you helped me change how I adapt in the morning, right? How I, use my coffee, what do I eat? You're also a big proponent of creatine, which most people probably haven't heard of. That's also kind of having a moment. Menopause and creatine are both kind of having a moment. And you're advocating that for women to maintain muscle strength.
And brain health.
And brain health, right.
Yeah, so it used to be creatine was the bodybuilding supplement. Like men, well, not even just men, but people who were in the bodybuilding sport would use it to get a lot of muscle function and be able to lift more and get swole. And we know that that kind of creatine loading has caused kind of this misconception of what creatine actually is. So our body produces about 3 grams through the liver each day, but we use a lot more than that, because every fast energetic in the body, so that's brain metabolism, heart, gut, muscle contraction, even bone growth, they all use creatine, because creatine is part of the first initial fueling system of all the energy systems in our body. So that 3 grams that our body produces isn't enough. And oftentimes, women in particular don't eat enough of the creatine-containing foods. When I say that, it takes about 22 chicken breasts to get 1 gram of creatine. So
22 chicken breasts.
So think about,
Yeah.
eating that kind of food for creatine production. So if we talk about supplementation, we look at creatine monohydrate, which is one of the most studied supplements across all spans of life, from teenage to post-menopause, men, women, pregnancy even. And it's safe. And we look at 3 to 5 grams of creatine, which will saturate all the tissues. And we see in randomized controlled trials that not only is our muscle performance improved, we have better proprioception, better muscle control, but our brain health also. We see that when the brain gets at saturation of creatine, it works better, better brain metabolism. We see women get out of depressive and anxious episodes a lot faster than when they don't use it. There are some women who use cognitive behavior therapy and creatine instead of a serotonin reuptake inhibitor, which is a normal call to action for depression and anxiety. So it's,
and for menopause.
and for menopause,
And
right?
menopause. That's the other thing that I was talking to a doctor yesterday who said that his sister is perimenopausal, menopausal, and she went to her primary doctor describing her mood and kind of feeling depressive and everything, and was immediately assigned an SSRI, and hormones were never even discussed.
Wow.
Because we're still in this kind of trying to catch up from the Women's Health Initiative, still a widespread fear about hormones and when to take them, if to take them, and how long to take them.
Yeah, that's a sticky point, the how long.
How long.
Yeah, I worked on the Women's Health Initiative data set when I was at Stanford. Marcia Stefanik was my mentor. And we still have conversations around it, how it was misplayed in the media, which created this fear.
Right.
And now we're having the pendulum swing the other way, and we have pockets of people who are like, everyone should use hormones all the time. It's like, well, that's not really that safe either, because we don't know the long term. But we can see case by case and decade by decade, and we can see some of the side effects that might require someone to come off it. So one of the issues, again, is the education and trying to find physicians that are really upskilled and educated about it, so that someone like your friend who is having all these incidences, instead of being prescribed an SSRI, could talk about hormones. Right?
What is the feeling, do you think, about how long should women stay on hormones?
Oh, I think it really comes down to the individual. Like, when did your menopause actually start? Like, when did you start having symptoms? When did your mom go through it? Like, looking at family history, and then seeing what are your risk factors, and looking at cardiovascular disease, what are some of our osteoporotic risk factors? So all the things that we have FDA approval for menopause hormone therapy to consider. Should everyone be on it for a long period of time? I always bring it back to, you know what? When a girl is 13 having irregular periods, the default right now is to put them on an oral contraceptive pill.
Yeah.
We are just now seeing the ramifications of that, and it's been going on forever. We see that there are structural changes in the brain when someone is exposed to exogenous hormones. And is it a good thing? Not really, because it changes the amygdala. So fear and emotional perception is different, and we see there's higher anxiety and higher depression in girls who have been on OCs. So if we're looking at menopause hormone therapy, it's not as strong of a hormone as an oral contraceptive pill, but we still don't know the full ramifications. So right now we still have to do anecdote, case by case, really work with someone who understands you while we're gathering that long-term data.
That brings you back to, that's just not fair, that there's this whole generation of women who were told to get off hormones, told not to take hormones, and then are left really with nothing, because there's no research to guide them into really the most vulnerable times in their life, right? And they don't have any research to guide them into their 70s, their 80s, or 90s, which is, as I say, their most vulnerable period.
Right. There is one data set that isn't that aware, or people aren't that aware of in the States. It's the UK Million Women Study. And it was done at the same time as the WHI, but on perimenopausal women. So this was done specifically to see how hormones can help. Whereas the Women's Health Initiative was looking at women who were 10 years or further from menopause to see if it could stop some of the public burden diseases. 2 different outcomes they were looking at. So that they have a longitudinal data set of the women's, or UK Million Women Study. And a lot of that data hasn't been published. So I'm like, we need to get in there and see what we can see for this long-term research.
And there seems to also be a lot of research coming out, or a lot of talk about GLPs and brain health and inflammation. Is that some area that you think is exciting or to be determined, or?
Yeah, I look at it again as a tool in the toolbox.
Yeah.
And there was a review paper that was published that had all of these kind of tangents of what a GLP-1 could do with brain health, cardiovascular health, bone health, Alzheimer's, all those kinds of things, to promote research questions. But people have taken that and said there's scientific evidence for this. So again, we still need some more research to come out of it.
Yeah.
I love it as a tool. I mean, I worked for an obesity surgeon back in the day when we didn't have those kinds of things. We put people on high protein diets to instigate more GLP-1 and but it wasn't as powerful as what the GLP-1s are. So it's a great tool. But the caveat is we also need to educate people of what to do to maintain bone and maintain muscle and build that so that they can come off that.
What gets you excited about all this? I mean, you have, which we'll mention, this book, Roar, is phenomenal. It's really great. I had it on my kitchen counter the other day, and my niece, who's 26 or 27, walked in and she goes, I just got that book.
Awesome.
She said, my mom sent it to me. My mom just got this book. And I said, well, I'm interviewing the woman who wrote this book. And so, and this is revised, but these, what is kind of when you close your eyes and you think, you know, they always say, I think myself, like, what would put me out of business? What is the thing where I could say, like, check, mission accomplished?
Yeah.
What is that for you? You know, to sit there and go like, I did what I came here to do.
Yeah, I don't think I'll ever accomplish it, but it's still a driving force. I want every woman to understand their bodies, be empowered to ask the questions they need to. And I want us all having Zimmer frame races at 105.
Zimmer race?
Zimmer frames, you know, the Zimmer frame.
Yeah.
Where we're all strong enough to be independent and we're all racing each other on the Zimmer frames. Or maybe not a Zimmer frame. Maybe we're just racing because we're strong enough.
And you really envision that women in their 90s and or their hundreds can actually be strong, independent, have the muscles that they need to carry them through.
I do. I also had a really fantastic role model in my grandmother. My grandmother died a couple of years ago at 105 and a half. And she grew up as a farm daughter and was active her whole life. And then as she got older, she says, I blame Stacy, but she would get up and she would do push-ups against the wall. She would do sit to stand from the chair, just trying to stay active and mobile. And there wasn't anything that she said she couldn't do. So I'm like, okay, if we can get that motivation in everybody, yes, genetics play into things, but if we start everyone earlier, then they have a longer lead time into that. So we need to allow women to understand that nothing's off limits. We can do everything that our counterpart in a male body can do. We just modify it for us to become strong, to take up space, to have the brain health, have the health span. And we need to listen to women and women's data because the bro science isn't going to make it for us.
And what would you say to the bro scientists, the bro podcasters, the guys that are out there kind of laying out the longevity space without really regard to women's health? What would you say to them, or what would you say to women who are listening to them?
Yeah, I always say, look, take a pause and find out the population to which they're speaking and which they're getting their data. Because if we are not taking care of ourselves and our own physiology, and we're not taking care of the basics of sleep and community involvement and how we're eating and how we're moving, then all the bro science things of methylation, methylated blue, rapamycin, all these things is not going to work. There's not any evidence really that it works for the most part. In men, it's a couple of studies, and that's being shouted out as the be-all, end-all. But for women, let's take it a step back. Let's actually take care of ourselves because we've been the caregivers for so long. So if we take care of ourselves and really start investing in ourselves and our friends and having that community, then we can drive answers, and we can drive research from anecdotal answers as well. We need those answers.
Awesome. Okay, Stacy, I always ask people that I interview, because this is about, kind of helping people live lives above the noise, living lives of meaning. And I always say moving humanity forward. How do you yourself live your life above the noise?
I have a little bit of a fortune to be able to live in a very small beach town in New Zealand, so I get away from a lot of the noise. But I try to live my life as a role model for my daughter and her friends, because I think about all the stuff that we've gone through and what we have tried to pave the way or has been taken away. And I don't want my daughter to have to do the same fight. So, and I also see my research colleagues who are doing really good research, but might not have the opportunity to get it out there, or they might not have the strength to be able to fight forward. I'm willing to take the fight and the hate and to push everyone forward, because I want the world to be a better place and a more equal place. So I really try to be empathetic and compassionate and be a good role model for people.
Do you find that you need to sit in silence? Do you need to put your devices away? Is there any one practice you have that allows you to sit in that knowledge, that knowing that I want to walk in the world as a role model?
I have to admit that I don't have a smartwatch. I have an old-fashioned analog watch. I put my phone on airplane mode every Saturday. So I have at least one day where I'm completely disconnected. And I wake up every morning at least 20 minutes before anyone else in the house, so I can have that silence to be able to reset for the day. And I do some kind of physical activity every day for mind and body.